Hey everybody, it's Trags outside Fenway Park. I'm joined by Alex Barth of CLNS Media and the Callin' It podcast on the CLNS Media Network. Be sure to check it out. David Price, where do you think he is compared to what he was last year? I think he's in a much better position, and I think he is in a better position not only on the mound but off the field in his head.
So comparing him to where he was last year is a very contextual question, Trags, because at this time last year, calendar-wise, his ERA was in the low fives, and he wasn't pitching well. It was around this time. I believe it was a year ago last week that he had the incident in the locker room with Evan Drellick. But that was only around his seventh start because, remember, he was on and off the DL last year. Right. If you want to talk start-wise, where was he last year? 15 starts was the end of the season. It was September, and his ERA, much like it is now, was in the mid-threes. So for the time of the year, he's doing much better. As deep into the season as he is pitching, he's doing about the same. But, you know, the same for what he was at the end of last year. And remember how good he was at the end of last year, even if it was in the bullpen. The Red Sox will take that. Now, it's not worth the contract, but I think we all knew going in he was never going to be worth the contract they signed him to. It's pretty good. He's been competitive. He's kept them in games. The run support, we know how that's been with the Red Sox, hasn't been there at times. But, you know, going into the season, if you told me this is what he'd be, I'd be pleasantly surprised with that.
Last year, 2017 AL East champions, he was one of the clutch relievers on the team, and they needed him to be that as they went into the playoffs against the Astros. This year, it's going to be different. He is going to be unquestionably the number 2 starter behind Chris Sale, and I think there's a lot of pressure that goes along with that, but so far I think he's embraced it pretty doggone well.
Yeah, look, I was clamoring in the offseason for them to make Price David Price the 8th inning guy. Now, would he be better than any other 8th inning guy they have right now? Probably, but that's another discussion. He's more valuable in the starting rotation.
No question about that.
No,
for the record.
I don't want that to be misconstrued at all. I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of credit for a bad take. But, yeah, no, he is going to be crucial in the postseason. And that's what this really all leads up to, right? He can pitch well in the regular season, and it's all well and good. I'm not saying that he shouldn't. I'm not saying that I don't want him to. I do. But it's the postseason, and it's David Price, and those two things together, there's not a good history. He won't really, I think, garner the respect he thinks he deserves in this city until he comes out and pitches competitively in the postseason.
2 words for you, Alex. John Lackey, 2013 World Series.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. Christian Arcan was talking about it this afternoon on 98.5, the Sports Hub. John Lackey was despised in this city. I think people forget how low the opinions were of him around these parts. And then he wins a World Series. The game against Detroit in the ALCS obviously is the lasting memory. And now he's a folk hero of sorts. And I think if David Price looks at that story and kind of sees, oh, he's pitched well, 7 starts in a row without allowing 3 or more earned runs, and he sees that the critics have kind of become quiet, he sees these things going on, he thinks, you know what? Maybe I can make this tolerable. If I just go out and I pitch, maybe I can make Boston tolerable, because this is essentially a contract year for David Price, right? He has the opt-out coming up, and if he really hates Boston, is it worth $125 million for him to leave? That's the question. Me personally, I tolerate just about anything for $125 million, but if he hates Boston as much as he says, we'll see. Obviously, the best thing for everybody is he pitches well, and then he can either get out of here or he pitches well, everybody shuts up, and he says, you know what, I could take a couple more years of this.
You know why I think he's much more comfortable this year? 2 people, Alex Cora, Dana Levangie, pitching coach.
Yeah, I think with Cora, the big thing is that it's not John Farrell. I think you had just 2 personality types, 2 individuals that wouldn't work well together. They could be, you know, sitting in cubicles doing TPS reports, and there would be issues there. I just don't think those guys got along. Alex Cora seems a lot more like the personality David Price is going to embrace. And Levangie, we know Carl Willis wasn't the ideal pitching coach. People in Boston didn't have the highest regard for him, so I think he had a better pitching coach, a manager who plays more to David Price's strengths.
Not to interrupt you, though, Alex. It's not what the fans' opinion of Carl Willis might have been. It's what matters inside the clubhouse, and that's where I think it does matter that Alex Cora is in charge and Dana Levangie has a different, I think, more relaxed approach. And the other thing I would say, Alex, seriously, is I think David Price and Chris Sale, for that matter, know they are being managed with October in mind. With John Farrell, it was a different story.
Oh, yeah, you could tell there was some issues with it at the beginning of the year. David Price, he had that game where he came out, didn't tip his cap because he thought he'd be going back in, which is fine. Chris Sale, we saw him looking, and nothing big, but looking annoyed when he got pulled out of games early. But I think now the message is clear, especially after what this team did last year and the fashion in which they lost to the Houston Astros. it's nice to see, and it's the first time we can say this about the Red Sox in a little bit. Seems like everybody's going in the same direction. Everybody has the same goal in mind, and they don't care if they come in, if they finish with the best MLB record or not. The goal is to get to the playoffs and do the damage there.
I think that Chris Sale and David Price together, if they get their act, well, I mean, Chris Sale, I think you know what you're getting in Chris Sale, but if David Price can be reliable, and we didn't see him in the starting rotation in 2017 in the postseason, if we can see a reliable David Price, I think it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, you could throw Steven Wright in there, too. Look, these guys are all question marks. Chris Sale doesn't have a great history in the postseason either. David Price, we talked about him. He doesn't. Knuckleball in October is always scary. Porcello and Pomerantz are crapshoots at this point. So it's not like they're just going to storm into the playoffs and overtake everybody. It's going to be an uphill battle, but the way it starts getting, specifically Sale and Price going in the postseason, is making sure they're healthy, fresh, and they're confident. I think later in the year, maybe they switch to a six-man rotation, give them some extra days off, get that pitch cap at about 75 to 90 pitches. Don't overwork them in September. And the way you do that is you win now. You win in the dog days of summer, so you're not battling with New York for the division. You're not battling with Seattle or Houston for the wild card. It's the season, it all builds up. You don't just get to October and the button resets. What they do now, how they manage these pitchers now, how their confidence is now, all of it is going to affect how it happens in October. And I know the Red Sox have been on a little bit of a slump, and people say, oh, it's fine, it's a long season. And that is true, but you know, you want them to be comfortable in September so they can manage these guys better, and I think that's where the focus needs to be right now, getting everything lined up now so it's lined up in September so you can line it up for October.
In 15 seconds, tell me why you do or don't trust David Price the rest of the season and into the playoffs in the starting rotation.
Because I don't trust him because it's always something. And you know something else will come up, and if it doesn't, I mean, I hope it doesn't. If it doesn't, that's great, but I have every reason to believe, based on his tenure here, that something's going to come up. And look, maybe there'll be meltdown, and then he'll resurge again in time for the playoffs. That's great. Maybe it's a meltdown that lasts through the season. I think that's 15 seconds. But the guy really is he's a wild card.
I disagree with you. I happen to trust David Price. I think he is going to keep his mouth shut. He is only going to speak when it matters. And I think that's a different David Price, and I think that's going to result in better results for the Red Sox and David Price on and off the field. He's Alex Barth. I'm Mike Petraglia, CLNS Media.